They laughed when they read Dad's will. Then my daughter hit play on a video that tore them apart. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all our latest stories. Your support means the world. If you find this video valuable, please give it a like. I and the other viewers would love to know what city you are tuning in from, so please comment your city name down below. Now let us begin the story. The heavy oak door of the library loomed before me, each carved detail a stark reminder of a life I once shared and now stood outside of. This familiar room, usually filled with the comforting scent of old paper and pipe tobacco, was today a cold stage set for the final act of my father's will reading. My grip tightened on my daughter Zoe's small hand, the warmth of her touch a fragile anchor in the storm of anxiety churning within me. A vivid memory flashed through my mind. My father's face, etched with disappointment the day I left. The weight of that memory, compounded by years of estrangement, pressed down on me as I prepared to face the family who had systematically treated me like an outcast. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped back into a world that felt both intimately familiar and icily distant. The immediate chill in the air had nothing to do with the late autumn weather outside. It emanated from the very beings gathered within those walls, my family. Every head turned, every pair of eyes fixed on me, a silent, collective judgment that felt heavier than any spoken accusation. The room, with its long mahogany table draped in a stark white cloth and the stiff leather chairs lined up like sentinels, felt more like a courtroom than the familiar space where I had spent countless childhood hours lost in books. "Scarlett, I see you still had the nerve to show up." My sister Victoria's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, sliced through the tense silence like a shard of glass. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair, the severe cut of her tailored suit, and the triumphant glint in her eyes all screamed of her presumed victory. She didn't even offer a greeting, just that cold, accusatory statement, a reminder of the family's unwavering belief that I had been rightfully cut out of our father's will. I swallowed the lump in my throat, refusing to engage. I had anticipated this reception, this wall of hostility, yet it still managed to prick at the old wounds. Quietly, I guided Zoe towards the only available seat, tucked away at the far end of the table. She looked up at me, her 8-year-old eyes wide with a worry that mirrored my own. I offered her a small, reassuring smile, hoping it was enough to mask the turmoil I felt. "Guess you didn't get the memo that your father made his wishes quite clear last year," my Uncle Lucas added, his voice a low, sarcastic drawl. He leaned back in his chair, a smug expression plastered across his face. Zoe flinched slightly at his harsh tone, and I squeezed her hand gently. I scanned the faces around the table. Victoria, Lucas, their spouses, our cousins, people who had once celebrated birthdays with me, offered comfort during heartbreaks, shared the mundane joys of family life. Now, they looked at me with a cold indifference, as if my very presence was an unwelcome intrusion. It had been years since anyone had called me sister, daughter, or even niece with genuine warmth. Since my marriage to a free-spirited artist had crumbled and I had left the family home with my infant daughter, I had been systematically erased from every holiday gathering, every phone call, every family story. Victoria had painted a vivid picture of my departure, portraying me as the selfish daughter who had abandoned our father in his time of need. No one had ever asked for my side of the story. No one had cared to know the reasons behind my leaving with baby Zoe, barely recovered from a difficult birth. My gaze drifted to the old family photos hanging on the walls. There we all were, frozen in time. Yet in every single one, my image had been carefully cropped out, a constant visual reminder of my excision from their history. Just then, the door opened, and Mr. Daniel, our father's longtime lawyer, entered the room, his presence adding a layer of solemnity to the already tense atmosphere. He carried a worn leather briefcase and a thick file, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the polished wooden floor. He nodded to everyone, his eyes briefly meeting mine with a flicker of something that wasn't quite sympathy, but perhaps a quiet acknowledgement. Everyone in the room likely believed I was there to witness the final confirmation of my disinheritance, to accept my fate as the black sheep of the family. But they didn't know that my presence wasn't about begging or fighting for an inheritance. I was there because of a conversation I had with Zoe just yesterday. "Mom," she had said, her voice filled with a childlike wisdom that often surprised me, "if Grandpa still remembers you, you need to know. Let's go." And I had agreed. Not for my father, but for Zoe. She deserved to know the truth, whatever it might be. Despite the hostility radiating from my family and the triumphant smirk playing on Victoria's lips, my focus remained on Mr. Daniel as he placed his briefcase on the table and began to unlatch it. I had no idea what lay ahead, but deep down, I had a feeling that this long and painful chapter of my life was far from over. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her posture radiating an almost regal confidence. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped lightly on the table, a silent drumroll to her anticipated victory. She exchanged a knowing glance with her husband, Mason, who offered a tight, supportive smile. The unspoken message was clear. They were the rightful heirs, and my presence was merely a formality, a sad reminder of my fall from grace. Still clinging to some fantasy that Dad would suddenly have a change of heart? Lucas sneered, his eyes narrowed with a familiar blend of mockery and resentment. He directed the question at me, but his gaze flickered toward Zoe, a subtle jab at my perceived failings as a mother. I felt Zoe's small hand tighten in mine, and I offered her another reassuring squeeze. I briefly allowed myself a bitter smile. They had no idea of the life I had built for Zoe and me after leaving. The endless nights spent studying after putting Zoe to bed, the sacrifices I had made to ensure she had everything she needed. Their narrative of my irresponsibility was a convenient fiction, one they had clung to for years without ever seeking the truth. Aunt Layla, Lucas's sister, regarded me with a look that was perhaps the most unsettling of all. It wasn't anger or even outright disdain, but a cold, pitying gaze that seemed to strip me bare, exposing every perceived flaw and misstep. I quickly averted my eyes, refusing to let her judgment penetrate the fragile shield I had constructed over the years. "Really, Scarlett," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false concern, "why are you even here? Surely you knew that Dad made his feelings about you quite clear. Why put yourself through this humiliation?" I lifted my chin, meeting her gaze directly. "I am here because I am his daughter, Victoria. Whether you or anyone else in this room likes it or not, that fact remains unchanged." The words were simple, spoken without anger, yet they seemed to ripple through the room, creating a momentary hush. Mr. Daniel cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the lingering tension. He adjusted his glasses and began to read from the thick document in front of him, his voice measured and professional. The legal jargon washed over me, a stark contrast to the raw emotions swirling within the room. "To my eldest daughter, Victoria Jefferson, I bequeath," Mr. Daniel continued, listing the various assets, the main house, the adjoining property, the extensive furnishings. With each item, Victoria's subtle smile widened, her satisfaction palpable. "To my brother, Lucas Jefferson, the lakeside property, the cabin, the fishing boat, each inheritance was announced, and with each announcement, a silent affirmation of the family's established hierarchy. And to my nephew, Alexander Jefferson, the vintage car collection, a prized possession of my father's." I glanced at Alexander, who offered a curt nod, his expression betraying a smug sense of entitlement. Then came the moment I had braced myself for. Mr. Daniel paused, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling back on the document. "And as for my youngest daughter, Scarlett Jefferson," he hesitated for a fraction of a second, a barely perceptible pause that felt like an eternity. "I have made no provision in this will." The words hung in the air, stark and final. No caveats, no explanations, just a clear, unequivocal statement of my exclusion. The crushing weight of those words, though anticipated, still landed with a painful thud in the pit of my stomach. A sharp, unrestrained snort of laughter erupted from Victoria, the sound echoing in the otherwise silent room. "Told you," she hissed, turning to Mason, her voice laced with cruel satisfaction. Her comment, though directed at her husband, was clearly intended for my ears, a final, triumphant jab. Lucas shook his head slowly, a look of exaggerated pity on his face. "Takes a special kind of person to alienate their own father so completely," he drawled, his tone dripping with judgment. His words, delivered with a theatrical sigh, reinforced the family's long-held narrative of me as the wayward daughter, deserving of nothing. Beside me, Zoe, though perhaps not fully grasping the legal ramifications of Mr. Daniel's words, instinctively sensed the shift in the atmosphere, the palpable weight of the silence, and the subtle cruelty directed at her mother. Her small hand tightened its grip on mine, and she turned her head, her brow furrowed with a worry that belied her young age. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I squeezed her hand in return, fighting back the wave of emotion that threatened to engulf me. I had known this was coming, had played this scene out in my mind countless times over the years. But nothing truly prepares you for the official pronouncement, for the cold, hard reality of being formally erased from your own father's life in front of your entire family. Around me, the low murmur of conversation began to bubble up. Victoria was already discussing renovation plans with Mason, her voice filled with excitement about the changes she would make to her house. Lucas was making a call on his cell phone, his side of the conversation peppered with triumphant pronouncements. The casual disregard for my presence, the immediate assumption of their inherited wealth, was a stark reminder of my outsider status. I sat there for a moment, feeling a strange sense of detachment. I hadn't come here expecting a windfall, but the finality of the disinheritance still stung. A part of me, a foolish, hopeful part, had perhaps clung to the idea of a gesture, a small acknowledgement that I had once been loved, once belonged. Just as I was contemplating whether to stand up and quietly slip away, Zoe's clear, unwavering voice cut through the self-absorbed chatter. "Mr. Daniel," she said, her tone surprisingly firm for an 8-year-old, "Grandpa told me to give you something if things got unfair." The room fell silent once more, the suddenness of her statement drawing all attention to her. Victoria's smug expression faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Lucas, who had been mid-sentence on his phone, abruptly stopped talking, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. I turned to Zoe, my heart pounding in my chest. "Zoe, what are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. Ignoring me, Zoe kept her gaze fixed on Mr. Daniel. With remarkable composure, she reached into her small backpack, the kind with cartoon characters on it, and pulled out a slightly wrinkled white envelope. It was sealed with brown tape, and across the front, in familiar bold handwriting, were the words, "For Mr. Daniel, to be opened if necessary." My breath hitched in my throat. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It was undeniably my father's. "Zoe, where did you get that?" I asked, my voice trembling, my hand instinctively reaching out to touch the envelope she held. Zoe turned to me, her eyes clear and steady, a mirror of a quiet strength I hadn't fully appreciated. "The last time I visited Grandpa," she said, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, "he gave it to me. He told me to keep it safe and to give it to Mr. Daniel if things got unfair or if people forgot something important." The silence in the room was now thick with anticipation, the earlier smugness replaced by a palpable unease. Victoria's face had lost some of its color, her eyes darting between Zoe and the envelope. Lucas leaned forward in his chair, his earlier arrogance replaced by a cautious curiosity. Even Alexander seemed intrigued, his gaze fixed on the small white rectangle in Zoe's hand. Mr. Daniel, his expression now a mixture of surprise and professional curiosity, reached out and gently took the envelope from Zoe. He examined it closely, his fingers tracing the familiar script of my father's name and address on the back. He then looked at Zoe, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Well, young lady," he said, his voice softer than it had been, "it seems your grandfather trusted you with a very important task." With careful deliberation, Mr. Daniel retrieved a letter opener from his briefcase and slit the taped seal. He unfolded the single sheet of paper inside and quickly scanned its contents. As he read, his eyebrows rose slightly, and a look of quiet understanding settled on his face. He then reached back into the envelope and pulled out a small black USB drive. "This letter," Mr. Daniel announced, his voice now carrying a weight of significance, "contains instructions from your father, Harold Jefferson. He requests that this USB drive, which he enclosed, be played under specific circumstances. He states that it holds a video recording he made prior to finalizing his last will and testament." He paused, looking around the room, his gaze lingering on Victoria and Lucas. Mr. Jefferson's instructions were clear. This video was to be played if, and I quote, "the reading of my will becomes contentious, or if it appears that the full truth is not being revealed." He paused again, his eyes meeting mine briefly. Given the tenor of the proceedings thus far, and the unexpected appearance of this evidence, I believe we have certainly met those conditions. Victoria scoffed, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "This is absurd," she declared, her voice a little too high-pitched. "A video? From who knows when? It has no legal standing." Lucas chimed in, his tone skeptical. "There's no proof it hasn't been tampered with. Harold never mentioned any video to me." Ignoring their objections, Mr. Daniel walked over to a small side table where a laptop was set up for the presentation of any documents. He plugged the USB drive into the port. Within seconds, a single video file appeared on the screen. He double-clicked it, and the room held its breath. The screen flickered, and then there he was. My father, Harold Jefferson, sat at his familiar mahogany desk in his study. The room behind him, with its overflowing bookshelves and the faint scent of pipe tobacco I remembered so well, felt like a ghost of happier times. He was wearing the light brown cardigan I had given him for his birthday years ago, the soft wool-looking worn but comforting. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his eyes, though a little tired, looked directly into the camera lens with an unnerving intensity. A hush fell over the room, so profound you could almost hear the hum of the laptop's fan. It felt as if time itself had stopped, all eyes glued to the image of the man who had just passed, now speaking from beyond the grave. Then, his voice, a familiar baritone, filled the silence. It was a little rougher than I remembered, but undeniably his. "If you are watching this, Scarlett," he began, his gaze unwavering, "it means things did not go as I had hoped. And for that, I am deeply sorry." My breath caught in my throat. Hearing him say my name, acknowledging me after all these years of silence, was like a dam finally breaking within me. He continued, his voice slow and steady, as if he were carefully choosing each word. "I know that you have likely just been informed that you are not included in my will. And I agreed to that at the time, believing it was the right thing to do. But as I drew closer to the end of my life, I did a great deal of reflecting. And I realized I was wrong. Wrong to believe what others told me without seeking your side of the story. Wrong not to ask you, even once, why you left." The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over, tracing hot paths down my cheeks. Beside me, I felt Zoe's small hand tighten its grip on mine, a silent offering of comfort and understanding. It was as if she had somehow known this moment would come, had waited patiently until I was strong enough to face it. "I had the pleasure of a visit from Lily recently," my father continued, his expression softening slightly, a hint of a smile touching his lips as he spoke Zoe's name. He had called her Lily in the video, a slip of the tongue perhaps, or maybe just a fond grandfatherly nickname. She didn't say much, but when I asked her about you, she looked at me with those big, knowing eyes and said, "Mom is the safest place in the world." The low murmurs that had rippled through the room earlier had completely faded. All that could be heard was my father's voice, resonating with a sincerity I had long thought lost. The voice of a man I had believed would never understand me, now admitting his mistakes, calling my name with a tenderness that had vanished from our interactions years ago. On the screen, my father's face, Harold Jefferson's face, looked both foreign and heartbreakingly familiar. The stern, often disapproving expression I had carried in my memory had been replaced by a look of gentle weariness, as if he were finally releasing a burden he had carried for too long. "Scarlett," he said again, his voice a little rougher this time, deeper than I remembered. "If you are watching this, then the will reading did not go as planned. And for that, perhaps that is my fault." I felt frozen, my hands numb from gripping Zoe's so tightly. The room was silent, every word echoing from the tiny speakers like a revelation. "For years," my father continued on the video, his gaze never wavering from the camera, "I let pride and anger cloud my judgment. I allowed myself to be swayed by misinformation. I believed Victoria when she said you left to avoid responsibility. I trusted Lucas when he insisted you had turned your back on this family. I didn't ask questions. I didn't investigate. I simply closed the door." His voice cracked slightly with emotion. "And because of that, I lost you." Those words, spoken with such raw honesty, cut through me like a physical blow. But it was a different kind of pain, the kind that peels away layers of scar tissue, revealing the raw, vulnerable flesh underneath. It was an acknowledgement of my truth, a validation I had yearned for but never expected. "When you came back, Scarlett," he said, his voice softening as he recalled that day, holding young Lily in your arms. "I remember looking out the window. I saw you standing in the rain, your shoulders slumped, the desperation in your eyes, and still, I didn't open the door. I thought I was right. I thought you owed me an apology." On the screen, I saw a flicker of pain cross his face, a silent admission of his profound regret. Beside me, I heard Victoria shift uncomfortably in her seat, a low, almost imperceptible rustle of fabric. Mason lowered his head, his gaze fixed on the tabletop. Lucas crossed his arms tightly over his chest, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. They were trying to maintain their composure, to project an air of indifference, but the truth unraveling in my father's voice was a force they couldn't ignore. "And now, looking back," my father continued, his gaze seeming to pierce directly into my soul, "I see it clearly. You were the bravest one in this family. You left when there was no other choice. You protected your daughter. You stood on your own 2 feet after everyone else turned away. You didn't come back for money, Scarlett. You came back because you deserved to hear what I should have said a long time ago." The tears streamed down my face now, silent but relentless, each one carrying away a little more of the years of pain and misunderstanding. "I am proud of you, Scarlett," my father said, his voice dropping to a low, thick murmur, heavy with remorse. "And I am so sorry. I am sorry for making you believe you weren't enough, weren't worthy, weren't loved. The truth is, you made it through all of it with your heart intact." He paused, taking a deep breath on the screen. "And because of that," he continued, his tone becoming firmer, "I revised my will. One final version, sent directly to Mr. Daniel, fully executed and legally binding." A collective gasp rippled through the room. "I leave this entire house to you, Scarlett," he stated, his voice resolute, "along with my savings account, my retirement stocks, and a scholarship fund for young Lily. I want her to have the chances you didn't." I heard someone inhale sharply. It sounded like Victoria. Lucas leaned forward abruptly, his mouth opening as if to object. But Mr. Daniel raised a hand, a silent command for him to remain quiet. "I know this will upset some people," my father said on the screen, as if anticipating their reactions across time. "But I am not doing this for fairness. I am doing this for truth. And the truth is, Scarlett, you deserve every good thing I can leave behind." The image on the screen began to fade to black, but before it disappeared completely, my father looked directly into the lens one last time, his gaze softening, the sternness replaced by a look of pure, unconditional love. It was exactly the way he used to look at me when I was little and scared of summer storms. "You are my daughter," he said gently, "and I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. Live well, Scarlett. For yourself, and for my granddaughter. Don't let them take your heart again." The screen went dark. No music, no effects, just silence, deep and heavy, like a final, profound confession. I sat there, still clutching Zoe's hand, the storm inside me not one of rage or regret, but of a profound, overwhelming sense of recognition. My father had seen me, truly seen me in the end. And he had chosen me. The silence in the room after the screen went black was thick and suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, Victoria erupted. Her chair scraped back violently, screeching across the wooden floor. Her face was pale, contorted with rage, but her eyes still clung to the last vestiges of her shattered pride. "No. No way," she shrieked, her voice shaking but clipped. "He never changed the will. I took care of him. I was with him until the very end." No one replied. Mason slowly stood, reaching out a tentative hand towards her shoulder, but Victoria violently shrugged him off without a word. She turned and stormed towards the door, not even glancing in my direction. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving a cold emptiness in the space where she had been. Lucas, still seated, stared at the black screen on the laptop as if it held some malevolent power. He turned to Mr. Daniel, his voice low and tense. "How do we know that video was real? He could have recorded that months ago, before he started losing his faculties." Mr. Daniel calmly sat back down, both hands resting lightly on the table. "Mr. Jefferson recorded that video 2 weeks before his passing, Mr. Jefferson. It is time-stamped and legally notarized. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, I was present when he signed the revised final will." Lucas clenched his jaw, his face flushed with anger. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but then seemed to deflate, realizing there was no logical ground to stand on. Everything was legal, documented, and witnessed. Alexander, who had been silent since the video ended, finally spoke, his voice low and filled with a mixture of disbelief and something akin to shame. I didn't think he'd actually do it," he mumbled, more to himself than to anyone else. He looked over at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he stood abruptly, grabbed his coat, and quietly left the room. No one tried to stop him.